Good day, everyone. Welcome to our subject, campus journalism. So, for today's discussion, we will talk about the foundational concepts on journalism. So, before getting into the skills of writing journalistic articles, anyone must have a fixed understanding of the scope of modern day journalism. Huge as it is, journalism is everywhere, just as media takes an integral part in all of our lives. Where there is a media, journalism exists. So, as a field that is worth working, journalism is one of the most prestigious careers one can get today. The tools of communications and technology are television, the printed media, and the radio. So the internet is more recent addition to this list. So many students are getting attracted to this field nowadays because a career in journalism can be challenging as well as highly rewarding. Journalism is concerned primarily with the collection and dissemination of news through the print media as well as the electronic media. So this involves various areas of work like reporting, writing, editing, and photographing. And also we have the broadcasting or cablecasting news items. So it covers the printed media that comes in the form of broadsheets, tabloids, newsletters, and magazines. So, as regard its etymology, journalism comes from the Latin word which is journal, which means daily. So, this is the that is why there is the word journal, a daily register of one's activities. So, hence, journalism is a communication of day to day information, whether through sounds, pictures, and words. So, few places where journalism may appear include newspapers, magazines, televisions, radios, and the internet. And one of that is the newspaper. So let's talk about the newspaper. So newspaper are the oldest and most traditional format for the inclusion of journalism. So they are regularly scheduled publications containing news of current events, informative articles, diverse features, and advertising. So newspapers originally started life as journals from which the word journalism is derived. So during the 19th century, American journalists relied on the sensational stories that were used to excite or they anger the public rather than to inform them. So this form of journalism became known as yellow journalism. So the accurate and fact-based reporting became popular again around the time of the World War II. So when the restrained style of writing gained resurgence. So newspaper played a large role in the development of freedom and expression. So inside sources with the ability to leak stories to the press often choose newspapers first over any other medium due to the perceived willingness of their editors to expose corruption and lies among otherwise respected institutions. So aside from newspapers, we've mentioned earlier also the magazines. So on the other hand, these are the publications containing a variety of articles that are generally published on a regular schedule. So whether it be weekly, monthly, or quarterly. So they usually take a much more relaxed format than newspapers. So with more informal style to their writing. So they are usually focused on a particular subject or area of interest, whereas newspaper, as we've mentioned earlier, can cover almost any topic. So the first published magazine is during the 1731 in London. That is the Gentleman's Magazine. That is considered the first general interest magazine. So its editor is Edward Cave, who wrote under the pseudonym Sylvanus Urban. So one of the very first to use the term magazines. Aside from that is we have the television news journalism, including radio. So this is known as news broadcasting and is produced locally in a newsroom or by a broadcast network. So, it is sometimes also includes such additional materials as sports coverage, weather forecasts, traffic reports, commentary, and other material that the broadcasters considers relevant to the intended audience. So, most major television channels offer regular news broadcasts throughout the day. So we have also the internet communications. So the internet communications have excelled in the last decade or so, of course, taking the way news is published with it. So there are now an uncountable digitized number of reputable and not so reputable sources of information on the internet. So everything from digitized versions of the very newspapers that headed up the first print media movements hundreds of years ago to independent bloggers reporting their own stories from the comfort of their own laptops. So, because of this, opinions are much easier to come by, and users can seek out the same story from multiple sources to get more of a balanced view more than they ever could in the past. So, this makes the scope of journalism to be very broad indeed, as almost every form of media these days can be used as an expression of opinion or source of information. So let us now differentiate the journalism and the literature. So all journalistic ventures are grounded on the facts, on truth, and on actuality. So redundant as may it, facts are the foundations of all the ambits of journalism. So the journalism and literature are both forms of writing consumed by the public and have relative styles. So they may be guided by a set of rules. So literature is based on the wandering imagination of a writer. So it is categorized into prose and poetry. So journalism, on the other hand, has a main genres that include news and editorial and features. So journalistic genres follow the strict method of dividing ideas through paragraphs. So while literature has a variety of forms and styles. So for instance, Jonas is a writer wishes to come up with a story about ghosts. So he now starts imagining the appearance of the ghost and creates a plot which includes the conflict, the climax, and the resolution of the conflict. So Jonas is writing a literary piece. While, for example, Marla, on the other hand, also writes about ghosts. However, before she starts writing about them, she interviews persons who have allegedly seen them. The appearance of ghosts, including the person's beliefs about them, is written into an entertaining way. So, hence, the output is packed with fa- facts. So, in this case, Jonas writes a literature and a short story in a particular, while Marla does a feature story, so a journalistic article. So Jonas writes based on his imagination, while Marla writes based on facts. So the tenets of journalism. So going to the road of journalism entails not only knowledge but also responsibilities. So these journalists are bound by strict guidelines. So journalism or the journalists have the rights but they must bear on shoulders the duties to serve the interests of the public, and one of that is the responsibility. So journalists should always be aware of their obligations to their readers to write the truth whatever it costs. For this reason, journalists must be brave enough to defend facts and the truth behind the news. So, in that sense, the journalist's main responsibility is to be the transmitter of veracity in any issue, and that they are liable not to the company but to the public. Next is the freedom of the press. As a basic right, freedom of the press should be safeguarded by the people of media. So in this case, any topic under the sweltering heat of the sun may be written so long as there is no infraction to the existing laws of the land. Next is the independent. So putting forward the life of one or two persons by slashing the welfare of the general public is a clear violation of this tenet. So therefore, means that the services of a journalist should be committed to the interests of the general public and not driven by the interests of money, called envelopmental journalism. Next is objectivity, truthfulness, and accuracy. So checking the veracity of the data and information before they are published in example of being accurate and truthful. So since facts are the solid foundation of journalism, media men should not therefore conceal the truth by fabricating facts and by publishing misquoted statements and erroneous statistics. So objectivity, on the other hand, is simply avoiding conflicts of interest on the treatment of the articles and on the way arguments and news are written. So partisan news and biased interviews violate the ideals of journalism. So, ergo, a journalist should know the difference between news and opinion. So, readers and journalists alike believe that newspapers should be objective. Thus, the reporters receive training from those who know journalistic rules and learn to resolve whatever conflict they may have. According to Till and Taylor, as cited by Pangilinan, suggested guidelines to attain a balanced story whenever journalists face controversial issues. Number one is stick to the facts. Never insert your personal opinion, so avoid subjectivity. Be discreet in the use of objectives. Avoid cheap shots. Somebody with something to say deserves a forum. And assess your alliances. Remember that you are an observer, not a participant, and listen to your editor. So, last but not the least is fairness. So, the whole point in advocating objectivity is to be fair in presenting information in any journalistic field. Remember, the public will see the topic according to the way journalists present it. Hence, the reporter should exercise telling the truth and putting the information in the right perspective. So, in this vein, journalists should always present both sides of the coin, both sides of the argument, both sides of controversial issues. So, they should set both avenues for the opposing parties to ventilate their arguments and points of clarifications. So, with this, journalists too must respect the privacy of individual unless there is a warrant of public right. In case there is a mistake, true journalists should rectify the said error, thus the errata in the newspaper. So let us now proceed and discussing the killers of balanced reporting. So there are worthy concepts that novice journalists must be worried about. The concepts that kill balanced reporting must be avoided. Number one is the yellow journalism. So this is what I've mentioned earlier. So this is simply sensationalizing a story or an issue. So it is a type of journalism that presents little or no legitimate, well-researched news and instead uses eye-catching headlines to sell more newspapers. So techniques may include exaggerations of news events, scandal mongering, or sensationalism, and most showbiz stories are grounded on this type of journalism, which appeals to the curiosity of the readers and the viewers. Next is the new journalism. So the new journalists expand the definition of journalism of legitimate journalistic reporting and writing techniques. So they also associated journalism with fiction when they describe their work with phrases such as nonfiction novel and narrative techniques of fiction. In so doing, they ignited a debate over how much like a novel or short story a journalistic piece could be before it began violating the journalism commitment to truth and the facts. So this approach represents a return to the roots of social reporting which was used in Charles Dickens' fiction. Next is the advocacy journalism. So this is a genre of journalism that um, unlike propaganda is fact-based but supports a specific point of view on an issue. So advocacy journalists are expected to focus on stories dealing with corporate business practices, government policies, political corruption, and social issues. So, arguably, advocacy journalists serve the public interest in a way similar to muckrakers or whistleblowers. So, most advocacy journalists reject the supposed objectivity of the mainstream press as a practical impossibility, and some others take the position that the economic censorship exerted by corporate sponsors is no different from political censorship. Another one is the stylistic journalism. So it emphasizes imaginative, stylized writing of stories and considers newspapers as the literature of immediate fact. So last is the editorializing. So this is giving the reporter's opinion rather than the fact. So it may also mean the expanding of news about an insignificant happening to give publicity to a subject. So those are the killers of balanced reporting. So again, we have the yellow journalism, the new journalism, the advocacy journalism, we have the stylistic journalism, and the editorializing. So those are the killers of balanced reporting. If you have fully made up your mind to go into the path of journalism and the media, you have to be acquainted with your vast roles and primordial functions. So, number one is the quality of the newspaper must be reflected in the editorial policy. So, it is more than just a business because it also reflects and influences the life of the whole academic community. So, number two is newspaper must have integrity and readers' confidence. The third one, I am sorry, the fundamental quality of the newspaper rests on the quality of the content and the kind of editorial product. Next is the freedom of the press encompasses responsibility of the newspaper. So freedom of the press and responsibilities are inseparable. So responsibility of the press means truth in the news, truth tempered with mercy, decency, and humility. So way back to let's go back to here the fundamental quality. So the additional information is that it is the responsible for the rise of the reader's educational level and resurgence of an articulate, active young generations. So next is the press must practice the principles of journalism without the bias and self-interest. Aside from the function and duties of the press, we have also the limitations of the press. So the limitations of the press may be traced upon the time frame within which an article should be submitted for publications. So remember that journalism secures the freshness of the information. So therefore, when a journalist is in a hurry to beat the deadline, he may not have enough time to reach all the sources of information. So subsequently, reporters will be unable to present the story in as many perspectives as journalists should showcase. So this implies that the readers or the information consuming public should judge very critically the articles, the reports, including the photos. So the reader should know how to ask questions that are left unanswered. In the same manner, when journalists dig for facts and additional information. So another limitations of the press is its proneness to be manipulated by the powerful, the elite, and the politicians. So according to Broder, as cited by Pangilinan, pointed, every good politician will attempt to work well with the press. If you live in a country where public opinion ultimately decides public policy, any politician who is at all serious is going to try to manage public opinion, and that means working with the press. So they all do it. So that's all for today's discussion about the foundations of the campus journalism. So basically, we just discussed the basic concepts on journalism, and we are linking the journalism and the campus paper. So I hope you finish the recorded discussion because I give you the performance activity and the face-to-face activity. So thank you very much, and I hope you learned something for today's discussion. So for your performance activity, on the comment section below, answer the following questions by following the given format. So don't forget to write your name, your section and your cluster, and your year, and your answer. So the deadline would be on August 15, 2023, 8 p.m. only. For the question, this is an essay. On the comment section, argue in not more than 200 words, but not less than 150 words, whether the freedom to write is an absolute freedom. So cite concrete instances if possible. So for your face-to-face activity, so you will submit it to me in my office. Number one is using the following guide questions. Analyze a daily newspaper. So, letter A, what seems to be the political link of the paper? Show your pieces of evidence. And then, is it radical, liberal, conservative, reactionary, and cite your reasons. So, you have to look for a daily newspaper and you have to answer the question letter A and question letter B. So for the second face-to-face activity, get three articles from a daily newspaper using the T-chart. Assess the articles according to the tenets of journalism. So again, you have to look for a daily newspaper and using the chart, you have to answer the strength and the weaknesses of the tenets of the journalism. The third activity, clip and mount on 8 and 1/2 by 11 paper, three samples of an article containing editorializing, a short but important news story, a long but important news story, and a story that fails to reveal its sources. So again, the 8 and 1/2 by 11, I think this is a long coupon bond paper, and you have to cut and found or look for a newspaper that contains an article containing editorials and such, and you have to paste it in a long coupon bond. Next, the fifth activity, compose a reflection paper on the importance of journalism in your life as a person in society. So you have four face-to-face activity. You have to do this because I will set a deadline of submission, and during the face-to-face or the face-to-face meeting you have to submit it. So again, you have to do this because we will compile all the face-to-face activities, and we will make this a portfolio. So meaning a portfolio is a compilation of your activity for the whole semester. So this is the first face-to-face activity. This is also included in your portfolio. So again, you have to submit this and you have to compile it to make your portfolio. So if you have any questions regarding the performance activity and a face-to-face activity, don't hesitate to message it in our group chat. So again, I want to remind you, I don't accommodate personal message. I will not reply to your message if it is personal message. I will only reply to your message if it is a message in our official group chat. So thank you very much. So see you in our next discussion.